Hej Verald, jag heter Zack the Demon Lord. Hey world, it is I, Zack the Demon Lord, and yet again another YouTube video. As you should know if you've watched my YouTube videos up till now, we won't be talking about the prose anymore. We'll be talking about other things. The topic I have chosen to talk to you guys about today is how do you learn a foreign language? Foreign languages have always been a passion of mine, so I would like to share about how you go about learning a foreign language. As I know from experience, the first time you get into it, it is quite a bit of a tricky thing, because you kind of just go in blind, not knowing what to expect. You could do anything from, in the beginning, without any sort of knowledge of how to go about it, you can end up doing a bunch of silly things like writing a bunch of words from Google Translate, or just writing down useless things from random web pages and so on and so forth, and copying down if it has a different writing system, literally copying what it looks like on your book, which is with certain languages, text font and actual handwritten font are quite a bit different. So what I'm getting at is you could do a lot of stupid stuff, and that's why I'm making this video, is to help those interested in learning foreign languages. Maybe it's you, maybe it's not, maybe it's a friend of yours, family member, who knows. I am trying to help inspire people to learn foreign languages, but also to help them on their journey. I do want to make a disclaimer. I don't consider myself to be the master of languages. I know it all, and I don't consider myself to be someone like that. Even though people, when they say this, it doesn't really come off like it, but I do mean it when I say I am a humble person. I realize that I'm not the greatest person out there, and that I have faults, and that maybe I'm not the greatest person ever, but at the same time, I do like to use what I do have to help those who I can. And so, that's why I'm making this video. I do not consider myself to be a polyglot, although by some people's definitions I could be. Here's the thing is, with things like polyglot and stuff like that, people have their own bar of what is considered fluent. I mean, maybe by certain standards you could call me a polyglot, it just depends. To give you an idea of my language skills, I've been studying Japanese since I was 13. I've been learning Korean since about 16, 17 years of age. And outside of that, I took 3 years of French in high school. And then outside of that, I've been just learning a bunch of other different languages. Obviously, more recently, Swedish has become a major part of my interests. But, yeah. If there is a language on Duolingo, I've clicked onto like learning the course or whatever. Like, I'm part of the course for any of the languages that are like for to be learned for English speakers. Now there's a majority of them that I just clicked on it to learn the very basics. Like, I want to know just the very basic stuff. What is the writing system like? What kind of language is it? Stuff like that. I want to get an air for what it is. Now, yeah, that isn't to say that I remember anything specific from the basics, but yeah. So basically, now I'm just gonna say these are the languages that I have any grasp on. Obviously, Japanese and Korean. Japanese, literally since I was 13, I've been studying it. Korean, I mean, since 16, 17 years of age, but I literally lived in South Korea for a year. I'm pretty sure I understand Korean pretty well. When you get to have that foreign experience of using your language in the field, it does improve your language skills a lot. Of course, maybe for me, I don't know if it's less or more so, because it was as a missionary. As mentioned, I used to, be a missionary for a certain church. Don't really affiliate with that church anymore, but it's something I did. And I mean, as much as that. Yep, I figured my batteries are about kaput. So I'll split. But yeah, let's just get into, I guess, the content though. So yeah, I don't consider myself a polyglot. As I said, there's a lot of different things, but experience. Japanese, Korean, as mentioned, high school, I did French. I learned German for a bit. I got into a Dutch kick for a bit. Obviously Swedish more recently. There have been points where I've gotten kicks in other languages, but they're just like very small kicks, so not influential enough for me to exactly know what I'm talking about for like 100%, but it's enough that I at least have a grasp of what that language is. So let's start with the first thing in learning a language, and that is picking a foreign language to learn. I think you need to be careful with this step. And I mean, it's okay to have, fun and games, and, just go by, I don't know, just follow the wind, so to say. But I think you need to be careful. And here's why. The biggest failure in learning a foreign language is that you don't have enough enthusiasm or want to learn that language. If you pick something that to you is boring, you're not going to be motivated to learn it. And so you need to pick your language very carefully. Like for me, my first language ever, Japanese. That was a perfect fit. I've loved anime, I've loved manga, I've loved Japanese culture, etc., etc. So for me, I had an interest in Japanese and the culture behind it, and I really wanted to learn it. And that's what you have to do. You have to go based off of your likes and stuff. Of course, you can look around and see what's for you, but that's the first thing that goes into picking language. A potential other thing that can go into learning a language is looking at potentially how hard it is, right? Certain languages are going to require more attention and more work in order for you to get good at them. However, when you go to, for example, like, I don't know what it's called for sure, but there's an American website that ranks each language, the learning process as pertains to English speakers. I don't think relying on the info of this is how many hours it takes and this is how difficult it is always accurate. And here's what I mean. I think different people learn different languages better or worse. I've noticed for me, I have an easier time with Asian languages than I do for most European languages. And that's because they just make sense to me. There's just a click, they make sense, and there can be some difficult features of Asian languages, but for me, they make more sense. But maybe for you it's different. Maybe you click better with African languages. Maybe you click better with, the aforementioned European languages. Or maybe you're an odd duck, and maybe what clicks best for you is the languages of some dying out indigenous people. Maybe you're better at, say, languages like Hawaiian or Navajo or something along those lines. Maybe that's your kind of language. But, who's to say? That's why I think it's important to look into the languages and stuff. Okay. I think my next thing I want to talk about is a key thing that changed my language learning experience. When you're a first time language learner, you got what I like to call English brain. You want to force the rules of English onto the language you're learning because it's convenient or because you don't know better. And so, this is the key thing that I noticed will change the game of you learning your language. And you can make this sort of thing more complicated, but I like to go by the most base thing. And that is, you have to learn the grammar order. I know that word sounds scary, but it's not as scary as it seems. So each language has rules, and the most base rule is there's a certain order that you have to put your words. I mean, if you're learning something for, say, like Latin, you don't really. There's a usual flow, but you could really just have any flow you want with a language like Latin. But most modern day languages have a set rule. And this has to do with 3 parts of a sentence: the subject of a sentence, the object of a sentence, and the verb. And so for English, we are what is called an SVO language: subject, verb, object. And so, for example, as a sentence, we would say, I eat fish. I is the subject. It's the thing doing the action. What are you doing? The verb. The verb is to eat. I eat. Okay? And then the object is the thing being affected upon. And what is being affected upon in the sentence? It's the fish. Because the sentence is, I eat fish. I'm the one doing the thing. What am I doing? I'm eating. And what am I eating? I'm eating a fish. And so, if you can learn that base principle of your language, it'll change the game. For example, if you're learning a language like Japanese or Korean, they are SOV, fairly similar, but the fish and the eat part need to get switched. So instead of I eat fish, it is literally going to be I fish eat. In Japanese, that would be Watashi wa sakana o tabemasu. And in Korean, that would be, let's see, 저는 고기를 먹어요. And so, both of those are literally I fish eat in both the Japanese and Korean case. But for English, it's different because it's, instead of I fish eat, we say I eat fish. And so that's the thing you need to get used to when learning a language. And there are some bizarre ones that you think that's crazy. There's ones where it's completely flipped. Imagine learning a VOS, fish eat I. You start out with your object, and then you have your verb, and then you end with the subject. Anyways, not to go into a rant, but that is the base thing you need to learn. I think another thing that can be helpful, because when you do get into these textbooks, and yes, everyone at some point should read a textbook for their language, there can be some scary words. Going back to the objects, there's this idea of a direct object and an indirect object. You read that, and you're going to think, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? I'm going to show you what that means. A direct object, as is implied, is something that is directly affected. An indirect object is something that is indirectly affected. And there's only one case where you really have to worry about this sort of direct and indirect, and that is in sentence of giving and taking. Stuff like that. So, for example, I give my dad a present. In that sentence, we have I is the subject. What are you doing? You give. Giving is the verb. And then there's 2 objects, the indirect and the direct. Of course, depending on the language, these direct and indirect may have a certain position they go in, and they can get flipped around and stuff. But in this case, the next thing that comes is who we're giving the present to. Well, that's my dad, right? And then what are you giving him? You're giving him a present. And so you may ask yourself, who in this case is the direct and indirect object? Well, I'll tell you. The direct object is the present. It's the thing that's being given. It's the thing that you're taking and you're handing to someone else. The person that you're handing it to, my dad, he is the one that is the indirect object. Because you're the subject doing the thing. You're physically giving the gift. And the gift, which you are directly affecting, is indirectly affecting the person you're giving it to. And so an easy way to think about this, although in English case sometimes things are messed up, is you can't switch things around. And so in this sentence, if we switch around and make more sense and say, I give a present to my dad. Anytime you have a sentence with the to someone or something, in this sort of case of giving and taking, that to, that thing marked by the word to, is an indirect object. And so, that is the difference between those two things. And then there's a rabbit hole of just other linguistic concepts you can go to. Let's say, for example, cases. When you hear the word cases, the first thing that probably comes to your mind is you're thinking about some movie like 000 or 007, or something like that, right? Where there's like a spies and these evil people, and then there's some briefcases of money. That's probably what you're first thinking when you hear the word cases. But I assure you, it's way different from that. A linguistic case is something interesting. Most languages will have just, for their nouns, one way of saying that noun. And then when we want to change how it's being used, we add a postposition or a preposition. Words like to, by, for, from, until, things like that. Now, it's not to say that languages that are purely case languages don't have stuff like that, but some languages of the case type, yeah. So to explain, what a case does is basically it means that nouns can take on different forms depending on how they're being used. And so, for example, look at the German language. The German language has 4 cases. However, they don't really go by the whole preposition, postposition thing, because they still have those. What is then being taken in this case are 4 different things. There's a way for your noun to be when it is being used as a subject. There's a way for your noun to be when it's being used as a direct object. There's a way for your noun to be when it's an indirect object, and then there's a way for it to be when it's in the genitive case. And what genitive means is it shows ownership. For example, the dad's clothes. What we're talking about clothes. Who do they belong to, though? They belong to the dad. Or we could say the principal's chair. What are we talking about? We're talking about a chair. Who does the chair belong to? It belongs to the principal. And so this apostrophe S or of in some cases, like Mother of God, who we're talking about? We're talking about a mother, and the mother is a mother to God, right? And then, so that's what genitive means. And then, so that's one thing to also look into your language is the cases. German cases, people grumble about it, it's difficult, but you get through it. But then, for example, if you learn a language like Finnish that has 14 different cases, it can potentially become pretty hectic. So that's one thing to look into when you're trying to pick your language. What else is there? I think as well, for me, a big factor is what are the verbs like? Every verb, uh, in the for the most part, can and will have a way of what is can't think of the word off the top of my head, but basically, you can change a verb or conjugate. That's the word. You can conjugate a verb to have to different things. Uh, it's kind of hard to explain because different languages do things differently. In the European sense, most languages of the European type will have the verb change according to who's doing it. You know, if we've taken a language class like Spanish or French, we've all seen those just graphs of this is how you conjugate this type of verb, this is how you conjugate this type of verb, and then you just see this chart, and then it shows you the different endings you have to, replace in the case of, whether it's I, he, she, it, they, we, so on and so forth, and you look at it, and then your mind spins, and then, yeah, we've all seen those sort of, conjugation charts. Which is, for me, that's the downfall of European languages. That's why I don't go well with the European languages, is the verbs. The crazy just verbs that just change depending on who's doing it, who's doing the action. And that's why I did better with languages like Japanese and Korean. You still conjugate the verbs, but rather than conjugating them according to who's doing what, you conjugate them according to who you're talking to or who you're talking about. And you change it according to the amount of respect that needs to be there. Because in Japanese and Korean, they have the low form that's casual. You use it with your buds, You're walking down the street just, shooting hay. You're just talking about whatever, you can in life. Right? You're just talking to your buds. And then they have what is the polite form, where this is what you use. You're talking to normal, everyday people that are strangers and stuff. And then they have sort of a respectful form, where you talk about and to your superiors with a language of respect. And then also when you're talking to or about yourself to your superiors, you make yourself humbled. You lower yourself. So that's how those kind of languages sort of work, is that you change it based upon that. Every language, I said, has conjugations. Some languages are less so, some are more. If we look at Chinese doesn't per se have conjugations. Instead, they have a bunch of auxiliary verbs. What an auxiliary verb is it's a verb that by itself is not commonly used. It is mainly used as an auxiliary. Auxiliary means to help or to be with. And so you're going to place a certain verb with another thing. For example, English has this too. Words like must, could, should, would, stuff like this. For example, I must go. You can't say I must, but it makes more sense when you have that other verb. I must go, I must walk, I must do this. Or, all of them can't stand by themselves, but it's usually like a short response, right? Someone comes up to you, do you think you should, try to get into that college? You might say, I should. Or, do you think you would, try out this, this piece of pizza? And then you might say, I would, short response. But usually in a full sentence, it's there to help another verb to convey a certain idea, right? The auxiliary verbs convey a certain idea, anyways, that's auxiliary verbs for you. What else can we get into? Another case of big scary words that goes back into the verb thing is they'll have a bunch of scary words like this is the augmentative form, or this is the I don't know, I can't think of actual words that or subjunctive form or imperfect form, or yeah, they'll just have a bunch of words and you look at it and you go, what? So in those sort of cases where a language book uses those sort of big words that just don't make any sense about the different forms of verbs that convey certain ideas, is I would just look at the, you know, look at the meaning of what it's talking about. Usually there'll be example sentences, and then use those as a guide. Just look at what the verb is doing. You know, just pay attention to the English to whatever language relationship, and look at what it's doing. But yeah, I think another thing to look at is tenses. Certain languages have more or less tenses. What is a tense? Tense is a linguistic thing for, you know, showing some sort of idea of time. You know, this idea of present, past, and future. You know, I did something, it's in the past. I do something, it's in the current, it's in the now. I will do something, it's in the future, right? But certain languages don't follow this sort of guide. Some of them will have more. They'll have like a two, you know, maybe they have another past. That's a past for just recently, or maybe it's a past for, yeah, that's definitely way back there. Maybe they have two futures, you know? They have a future for, I will do something very shortly into the future. Or a future is like, yeah, this is a plan for like years from now, right? So that's one thing to look into is tenses. For example, when I learned Japanese, Japanese only has two tenses. And this is an interesting thing, is sometimes these timelines can get fused. Because in Japanese they have past tense and then they have non-past tense. What does that even mean? That means you can say, I did, for those things that, you know, are in the past. And then you can say, I do, for things that you're doing currently and things you will do. Right? And so, people might say, well, that's confusing. Yeah, it can be confusing. But here's the thing, is certain languages, and this is another thing, are contextual languages. You have to pay attention to the context. You have to just focus on what's going on. And so, in the case of Japanese, you know, you have to focus on that context to understand what's going on. You know? And you can also use words that make it pretty clear, like today. If you say, I do it today, it's in the now. Like, you're doing it that very day. But if you say, I will do it tomorrow, if you say tomorrow do, in the case of Japanese, it means, hey, tomorrow, the future, hello, that's when I'm doing it. And so if you use time-specific words that can, you know, solve the problem, just pay attention to those sort of things. And this goes into another thing, speaking of context, that is important. Certain languages don't require you to say the subject all the time, like Japanese and Korean. And Spanish does this too, I believe too. Is if the context is clear, you don't need it. You don't need to always say, I'll do the dishes, for example. You can say, we'll do the dishes. And it's understood that you're talking about yourself, right? Especially since Japanese is geared, and Japanese and Korean, they're geared to this idea of, in their case, of respect. So you're gonna try to speak to someone respectfully if you're talking about them. If you're trying to say do the dishes, also when you say do the dishes, that's command form, and so they're gonna understand that you're talking to them and you're asking them to do them. In the Spanish case, I mean, technically any European language could do this. In this case, though, is, you know, that conjunction of the verb, when you have a certain way it's supposed to look for each subject, it's going to be clear what that verb is attached to, right? So yeah, that's with the Spanish case, their case. So yeah. So final thoughts. There's a lot of things I talked about, when learning it. So we'll just summarize things. When trying to learn a language and when picking a language, all that stuff, just look at, is it fun or not? Can I get into this? Will I be able to focus on this language? Go into some grammatic things. What is the grammar order? What are the verbs like? What are the nouns like? Does it have cases or not? Will I be able to understand? You can look at other things like, the tenses as mentioned. Some people, they need that just traditional past, present, future. Some people can't handle the idea of multiple past, multiple futures, or maybe even just not even a future, Not that people will learn it. You could go into language like Klingon, make-believe language for Star Trek, and get into that and be like, there is just no tense. It's just all one. That's all I do, whether it's past, present, or future. And that can get hectic too. Not that anyone would seriously learn Klingon, right? Right? I'm just kidding. You can learn Klingon if you want. But yeah, that's some information. That's my thoughts on learning a language. Just go into it passionately. You have to have that passion, or else you'll end up failing because you'll lose interest. You need to have that motivation. Sometimes you just need that help from someone else. Reach out to those that are knowledgeable for that specific language. Just keep going at it. If you choose to learn it, of course, you can do what you want. But if you truly want to learn your language, just go at it. Just keep going and going. And someday you'll find that you learned a foreign language. As well as you can, immerse yourself in that culture. At home, immerse yourself as much as you can. But if you do go abroad, that's much better. When you're surrounded by so many speakers of a language, it boosts your ability up. Given you already know some of it, that is what I think is a big key. You have to know some of it, because if you know nothing, you can't ask about it, right? And so at least know a little bit of what you're trying to learn. What else? There's so many thoughts that are coming to my head. So just do what you can to progress in the language. You need to have that interest. You need to keep working at it. Set a schedule. Just try to work at your language every day. You don't necessarily have to have a plan for, when you'll learn, how you'll learn, and stuff like that. That's not too important. I think it's good to use a mixed array of different studies. Have a textbook. Use a language learning app like Duolingo or something like that. You can also get an app where you talk with the tutor online, stuff like that. Of course, it depends how much you're willing to pay for your language learning, right? As well, you can make friends with people, stuff like that, that know your language. Just, find different ways. You'll need the motivation, you'll need the interest, and it's going to be more interesting when you have someone to actually use it with. It can be embarrassing too. I know that was one thing for me when I first had to use my Korean is I thought it was smart, but actually using it, it's kind of burdensome. You feel like, what if I speak wrong? And that's the thing that I think you need to get in your head too, is you need to get this idea that I'm not going to be perfect at this language. You have to think of yourself as a baby, right? Do babies come out of the womb, for example, in America, speaking perfect English? No, they don't. They don't just come out of the womb speaking English. They come out of the womb and then they're surrounded by their parents and they're observing their parents, and then they learn and grow step by step as they grow. Sorry about that split. Didn't realize it went over like the last video, went to the end and realized, oh, I hit the max amount of minutes. I noticed when my camera hits the max amount of minutes, it just shuts off, or it doesn't really shut off, but just stops filming. It doesn't really alarm me. But yeah, as I was saying though, you don't just come out of the womb speaking English, right? And so, just like with that, you know, don't be embarrassed about your language skills. It's just a step-by-step process. You just get better and better the more you practice it. Just like with anything else, people that learn to play the guitar, they can't just play like some awesome, just on the top of the world sort of riff, right? Or drummers, you know, I'm a drummer, so I know this too. Like, you can't just start the drums and then automatically be able to do like 16 notes on the double bass pedal and like a bunch of crazy cymbals and tom-toms and all that jazz, right? You don't just start off like that. You have to practice layer by layer, get better and better. And so it just really takes a lot of work and dedication and practice. And what you'll find is after, you know, maybe it takes a few years of studying, you just keep studying and studying and studying and practicing and practicing, and by the time you know it, you know, at first you're going to feel inadequate, you're going to feel like you don't know anything, you know, whatever language it is, it's just going to feel not great, but the more and more you learn it, the better you get, and then years fly by, you look back and you're like, yo, I got good skills. So yeah, just keep working and working and working. Another thing I thought of though, going back to my recommendations, is there is a warning I do want to give. Of course, depends on what your native language is, but if you're watching this video, your native language is probably English, or you've at least studied English enough to understand what I'm saying. And so, one word of advice I want to give to those learning a foreign language: if you pick an obscure language that is not a very studied language, you're going to have a hard time finding resources. For example, if you pick up Romanian, or if you pick up Cherokee, or if you pick up let me think of something else. Just like anything, just very, very obscure. Maybe like who dialect Chinese or something like that. Something like very, very obscure. When you pick languages that aren't very studied, there's not going to be a lot of resources for them. So what I would suggest in that case is do try to find a tutor. Do try to find someone who can share with you their knowledge of their language. You know, even going on other things like, for example, the Celtic languages. You know, Irish, Welsh, Scottish. Yes, I guess for cultural language there is quite a bit of speakers, but I would imagine it'd be harder to find you know, textbooks for that versus a classical language. You know, there's languages that no one speaks, but if it's a classical language, you can find it. Like the other day I was at Barnes & Noble and I found a book for classical Greek, but you know, who's out there learning classical Greek? So I just want to give you know, just that word of advice as well. Some languages have more teaching resources, some more learning resources than others as well. Going into that, some languages I have found they'll be very good at being taught in certain aspects, but not in others. For example, one flaw, for example, with Japanese. Really, really good resources on basically anything for Japanese, but for some reason, weird phenomenon is there's a lack of talk on pitch accent. And because of that, it's something that I'm not great at. And so the best thing you can do is just imitate those speakers that speak that language. You know, just try to listen to them and imitate the way that they talk. And that's kind of a sad thing, is that certain languages it'll be very round, all around. But then there's just that 1% that doesn't really get talked about. Another thing that I do want to mention is that some languages will have similarities, and this goes into someone that studies multiple languages. I'm not recommending it to everyone. Studying multiple languages has to be your niche. It's mine, but it may not be other people's. But here's something I found after I studied Korean, is that Japanese and Korean have very, very similar grammar, and because of that, they're mutually, very easy to learn if you know one of them. But what I also found is there's some things, some aspects that when I studied the Korean language, that when I studied that same concept that existed in Japanese, but with a Korean textbook, for some reason when it was in the Korean textbook, it made more sense because they explained it better. And so that is one thing to look into, is when you got similar languages, sometimes there's a certain concept that's explained better in another textbook versus another, in a completely different language that is similar. I would imagine that maybe for, Russian learners, maybe there's something, some aspect of Russian that doesn't really get explained well in a Russian textbook, but as you study Ukrainian and maybe Ukrainian has similar, things, it gets explained better in a Ukrainian textbook. Or maybe you're learning Norwegian, and maybe there's something in a Danish textbook that explained the same grammar principle and made the Norwegian make more sense. So sometimes one way of learning your language better is through another language. So that's one thing to also take into mind, is that sometimes and going with that aspect of learning a language through learning about another language, sometimes just learning a certain language in English just doesn't make sense, or at least fully just with English. For example, one way that I got to understand some of the Korean concepts when I was learning Korean better is by studying Korean in Japanese, because they're more similar languages, and so sometimes there's concepts that I understood that better through the Japanese, because it could be like, oh yeah, okay, so it's sort of like this Japanese word, okay, that makes sense. So that's another aspect that I just wanted to share. So just be creative, use your mind, try to look at different things that help you. Some people, there's different people that learn languages their own way, but for me, I think the base thing that you need to just try to look into is, what is the grammar order, what are the verbs like, does it have cases or not, stuff like that. When you look at those things, and you think for yourself whether something will be a setback or not, you have to just put those things in mind. But that's all I can share for now about how to learn a language. I wish you good luck on your journey if you do choose to learn a foreign language. I know for me, learning languages has been a fun thing. It's been a great journey, and I know for some of you out there it can be a great journey too. But that's enough rambling for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give me a like, please subscribe, please share with your friends and family. And for this video specifically, especially because if they're trying to learn a language, just to give them some tips, because I know first time learning a language, as mentioned, it's just grueling. You don't know any process. You're just a baby at learning in this specific sort of topic of languages. But the more knowledge you can have in the beginning, the better. The more things you can have in mind for how to be successful, the better. Because when it's your first language you're learning, it can be grueling and it can set you back some steps. They might say, this language takes 2 years, but by having it be your first one, some of those setbacks can make it take 3-4 years to get proficient, enough to be considered sort of fluent, or what would be my fluency, like native fluency, where you're close enough to being a native, or at least you're good enough to hold up a conversation, right? So yeah. that's been the video. You know, please like, please subscribe as mentioned, do those things, and please help me out. It's my dream, per usual, as I've said, to be a pro YouTuber, and so any way you can help me is immensely appreciated. But yeah, until the next one, hey-do.